Hello everybody, today in this video we are going to play Open Sicilian defense, which starts e4, c5 and white opts for the most frequent line with knight f3, which is called the Open Sicilian. So now we have several options for black, g6, e6, d6, knight c6, but I recommend d6 as the most flexible option. I like to play this, leading frequently to so-called Najdorf defense. Here, white will most probably play d4 immediately, breaking to the center, but let us see first other options. Some players like to play other moves, so if d3, this is actually good for black, we can simply continue our development with knight f6, and actually already small advantages on black side here. Going back, if white plays knight c3 immediately, then actually I prefer to stop d4 here immediately with e5. Although there is a hole on d5 now where white's knight can jump on d5, but without other pieces it cannot do much. So in this variation I prefer going with e5. We shall actually regularly play e5 also in many other variants. Only in some cases we shall go with small center with e6. So I step back. If white plays c3, preparing d4 this way, we again have time for developing move knight f6. So I will actually prefer knight f6 as long as we can to play. We were not allowed to play immediately knight f6 on the second move. It's not preferable because white have e5 option, but now e5 is not playable because we can take with the d pawn. So first d6 and then knight f6 if allowed. We shall see more in main lines here. I shall not go more deeply because the main structures in Sicilian will be seen in main lines and some other side lines later. Now I cover only first few moves that you know how to start to play if white plays suboptimal moves, and actually you already have a small advantage according to computer here in these lines. Stepping back, if white decides to play bishop c4, then actually knight f6 is also playable. Knight f6 is also playable here. I prefer it at this point. You don't need to be afraid, for example, of knight g5 because there is a defense, of course, only one, but e6 is enough to stop threats on f7 square here. So for you not need to play immediately e6, but first knight f6, and if this variant occurs, then e6 is a defensive move. And finally, before going to the main line, we shall see what happens if white plays bishop b5 check. There are several possibilities here. We can play it either bishop d7 to stop the check or knight c6, but I actually prefer knight d7. Knight d7 because if white takes, our bishop will go to d7, which is okay square, and actually we can further target chase the bishop with a6 later. So I prefer here to play knight d7 in this variant with the early check here. And finally, we step back and we see what happens if white plays d4, which is the main line in this situation. Of course, we shall take the purpose of c5 was actually to stop this d4, and so we take with the c pawn. Now, most frequently, white will retake with the knight, but let us see other options. Let us see other options first. Too, we will just simply comment briefly other options. Other options are actually c3. Okay, in this variant, d takes c3 is playable, so you can play d takes c3. This is playable. If I'm correct, this is Smith-Mora gambit variant, but I prefer rather not to take here. We will be a pawn up, but white will be with a decent positional advantage with better development. And actually, there is another good move, simply knight f6. Simply developing move knight f6, and I will prefer this knight f6, going with actually our ideas. Even in this variant, we try to play the ideas and not the opponent's ideas. So knight f6 I recommend after c3. Also, if white retakes with the queen, although we can play logical knight c6 chasing the queen, and knight c6 will be preferred, especially when we can play this without being pinned with bishop b5, and actually this can happen now. So I will actually again recommend knight f6. So even if queen takes, we are going with our idea, knight f6. And actually, I'm stepping back. If in the main line white retakes with the knight, we are again going with our idea, knight f6, which immediately challenges e4 pawn, and so white need to protect the e4 pawn. Okay, let us see now which are frequent options for protecting that pawn and which are frequent options. If f3, which is actually not a bad move, because in this Sicilian defense, white frequently has ideas pushing the pawn on the king side and going to a long castle. So f3 is really playable. Here I recommend to e5. Our main response here will be e5, chasing knight on d4. Also in other variants, so e5 will be our move here. We step back to another option, which is not very frequent, but playable on beginner level. So when you play with amateur players, you can also expect bishop d3 move, which will protect e4 pawn this way. Now I recommend that we play knight c6 first. So we actually postpone this move if white plays more actively, but in this position I recommend developing another knight, also knight c6. And now we are stepping back, and we shall see the main line, which is actually knight c3, developing the knight, another knight, and this way protecting e4 pawn. This is now main line. And after our next move, which is a6, this is called a Najdorf variation of the Sicilian defense, and I recommend to play this, so to play a6. Okay. We shall now see many variants for white. There are really many variants for white in this Najdorf Sicilian. That is the reason why some players don't like to play this variant, but actually we will see that the theory is not too large, and actually we will not cover all possible moves, but the most frequent playable on master level and also on beginner levels on site like leeches.com. Let us see what options the white has and which are the most frequent options. Some players like to play early a4, which is in some sense logical, preventing us from playing b4. So if you encounter early a4, we will simply play our developing move, and our next developing move will be e5. So if there is no true reason for playing something else, I will simply go with e5 here. So we play e5. Also, if black now goes with bishop d3, further developing e4 pawn, we will again play e5, chasing that knight on d4. Okay, let us see some other options. Stepping back, if white plays g3, I already mentioned that pushing the pawns on the king side will be frequent idea, so pushing actually all these pawns is playable in some sense in certain variants. So g3 is playable here, but again we will go simply with e5 here. Okay, we will now cover this more deeply, this variant. We will now cover several options for white. Some players after g3 will immediately play bishop to g2, so going to the fianchetto. This is the common idea, but actually if they blitz this in the game, they are of course losing the knight. This is a blunder. We can simply take e pawn takes d4, so we are winning the full piece here. We are stepping back. Let us see other better options for white. If knight f5, knight f5 is not the best option here for white, because knight f5 allows d5 d4 breakthrough. After d5, which I recommend now, of course, Of course, black cannot take because depending on the variants, but in any case, if white takes either with the pawn, will immediately lose the knight on f5, bishop takes f5, and after, for example, knight takes d5. We will first take the knight, and then actually. And then actually, if white takes, it loses the knight on f5. So some players will play knight f5 here. It seems a logical move, but it is not the best play by white because it allows d5, d4 breakthrough here. So we step back. We step back and see other options for white here. If white plays knight f3, which is now a better move, but nothing special, simply allows us to go further with the development. Bishop e7, preparing short castle, and so this is the way to play. Stepping back and seeing some other options. A knight b3 will be common move for this knight when chased with e5, also in other variations. So this is a good choice. But after knight b3, actually we continue with our plan, bishop e7, and going to a short castle shortly. And the last variant which will sometimes be played is actually knight d2 e2. Same strange, but it doesn't put the knight in front of the pawn, so all pawns except the c pawn are now pushable, so it has some sense. But again, we will go simply with bishop e7 here in this variant. Okay, we will now step back and to see what happens if instead of g3 white pushes another pawn which is f3. So if white plays f3, this is another variant, but again we will go with the plan. We again simply stick to e5, chasing the d4 knight, and again there are many options. Some players will blitz bishop e3 because this is frequent in the Sicilian, f3 with combination to bishop e3. But again, this is a huge blunder. Simply we take the full. We simply take the full piece here. Okay, of course, I'm not taking you all I'm not talking to you about all possible blunders, but these which I mentioned are really frequent in real games. So you can't believe that this bishop e3 is pretty much frequent. Okay, maybe 2% games, but again 2%. So this can really happen in amateur play, so you simply need to watch on blunders. Actually, recently I was playing a rapid game on chess.com, and actually I didn't see that early in the opening opponent blundered the queen, and I didn't take the queen. Actually, I was not expecting that, and so it's good to be aware of that possibilities that your opponent will blunder even early in the opening. So we step back and let us see other options. If in this variant white plays knight to f5, but again this allows d4 and d5 d4 breakthrough, so this is not the best for white to place the knight on f5. In some variations maybe this will be playable, but more frequently not, and almost always you need to watch about this d5 d4 breakthrough. So let me step back and let us see what are other better options for white. If now a knight d2 e2, okay, not too bad, but we go again with the plan. We are actually white here in a sense. We have a slight better development in the opening, and we go further with bishop e6, developing another piece here. Okay, we are stepping back. And finally, let us see probably the best move for white here, simply putting the knight on b3. So when chased with e5, frequently the best option is simply to put the knight on b3. And this is the case here. And also here we again go with our developing move, bishop e6. So bishop e6 is played. And let us see some other options which are played by white here. If white play bishop d3, it's not very common move, but we already saw this move. Some players like to place that bishop on this square, d3. So preparing a short castle. Maybe it's better for us to go with another bishop, but we shall see all variants soon. And here after bishop d3, I recommend that we play b5. We already have a solid development, and we are actually allowed to play this a6 b5. And when we are allowed to play this and not sacrificing the development of other pieces, I will actually recommend to play this a6 b5 in the Sicilian. Okay, stepping back. Stepping back, and let us see what happens if white immediately jump with the knight to d5. So if a knight d5 is played, actually there are now several possibilities here. And actually, I will frequently recommend to take with the bishop here, but now in this concrete position, maybe it's slightly better to take with the knight, because when white retakes, there is a good position for the bishop on f5. You need to watch this. Sometimes there will be not a good position on f5 for the bishop, and in that cases I will recommend to take with the bishop rather on d5. So we step back, and let us see other options, and these are: if white plays bishop g5, pinning our knight on f6, and actually I will recommend not maybe natural bishop e7, but rather I prefer developing another knight now knight b to d7, protecting the knight on f6. So our bishop is already on e6. Our white squared bishop is already in front of the knight, so knight b d7 is a good move here. Okay, stepping back, and we see the last option for white, which is actually a main line. If bishop to e3. If bishop to e3, this is actually the main line here. And although there are several possibilities for black in this concrete variation, because it can become dangerous for the black on the king side, I recommend immediately going with h5 here. So we will weaken a little bit our king side, but we will confront the pawns and other pieces attacking on our king side. So h5 is here recommended after f3 and bishop e3, and we already developed two pieces and central pawns. I recommend that we go with h5 here. Okay. Now some players will confront this with h4, which is probably not the best move, but maybe you can expect this as a natural reaction to h5. And we will simply go with developing move, and again knight b2 d7. Also stepping back, if now bishop d3 is played, I again recommend going with this knight b2 d7. This knight can later further jump on b6, taking a look at d5 square, actually controlling the d5 square. So this will be a good play for this knight here. Okay. Also, if a white plays more passive move with that bishop to e2, I again recommend knight b2 to d7. And finally, if actually there are two more frequently played moves, actually these are main lines now. If now a knight jumps to d5, now I will recommend to take with the bishop. Let us see briefly what happens if we take with the knight. Then e takes, and actually, although we have a square f5 for the bishop, this is not the best play. We already played h5. We will be under attack on that king side. Maybe this is not what I want to see for the black in this position. So stepping back. So after knight d5 in this variation, I recommend that we simply take with the bishop. So bishop takes. We are giving up a bishop pair, but this is more playable for black here. Okay, stepping back, and another main line is to play first queen d2, preparing a long castle for the white, and I again recommend knight b2 d7 as a further developing move. Okay, we will see more in other lines too, so we are now stepping back to move number 6. We have now seen f3. And we will now cover what happens if white immediately play f4. So f4 is also playable, but we will go with our plan with e5, and actually e5 will immediately challenge that pawn on f4. So we will play again e5 even against the f4. Of course, now one option is that white will take and we will retake. This is also playable, but this is not the best play for white. Black already has a small advantage here, so we step back. There are better options for white instead of taking on e5, and these are again moves by knight, because knight d4 is under attack. And now if knight f5, okay, knight f5 is now maybe not the best move, but actually it is playable in a sense that after f4 we don't have d5. Actually, let us see briefly what happens if we now tries to play d5, d4 breakthrough. So if we now place d5, if we now place d5, actually white has played knight to e3. And if we go with d4, it seems just good. We are forking two knights, but actually white has this f4 pawn, so white can take on e5, attacking our knight too. So this is actually a better for white now. So when white's f pawn is on f4, this d5 d4 breakthrough doesn't work anymore. So this knight f5 is now playable, but now I don't recommend to play d5, but now developing another knight to c6. So I recommend that we play knight c6 in this variation. Of course, now playing knight b to d7 is not playable, because our pawn on d6 will not be defended. So we cannot now play knight b to d7, but we rather play knight c6. So we step back. If instead of f5 white plays knight b3, now we can play knight b to d7, because our pawn on d6 is attacked only by the queen, and we are protecting with f8 bishop. So now knight b to d7 is playable, and actually this is a better square for that knight, but when allowed to play. When we are not allowed, c6 will be also okay square. So we are stepping back, and we are seeing the last option. If knight goes to f3, which is also playable here, but I already said that most Sicilian players will rather play knight to b3, preparing maybe a long castle and having two knights in as a as a shield again, together with the pawn in front of the pawns in front of the king. But okay, knight f3 is also playable, not any mistake. And we again go with knight b2 to d7 with this variant. And we are again stepping back to move number 6, and we see what happens if instead of we already saw g3, f3, f4. Most moves will be these 3 pawns, f, g, or h, but there are also some other variants. And now we will see another move with the pawn h3. So the purpose of h3 is, of course, to prepare g4. Also, we are not allowed to play bishop or knight to g4, so h3 has some sense too. But after h3, we will simply continue with the plan. We again play e5. And again, black needs to decide what to do with that knight. And again, we will see already seen moves. If a knight f5, this is not the best. It will allow us to play a d5 and later d4. So knight f5 is not the best reaction for white here. Another options which we saw are knight f3. Actually, knight f3 is also not completely natural here, and actually after knight f3 we are allowed to play also a quiet move, bishop e7, but preparing to short castle. Actually, I will rather prefer other moves here than bishop to e7, but after this knight f3 we have time to play bishop to e7. So I recommend bishop e7 here. If instead white plays knight to b3, which is more logical here. Now bishop e7 is of course playable, but I will here prefer instead going to bishop e6, as already seen in previous variation. We are immediately taking the eye on d5 square, and also in some sense we have an eye also on b3 knight. And finally we step back and we see another last options. We already saw that knight d to e2 is also playable. Now with this move black is actually preparing a strong attack on the king side, and in this move actually h5 is really the best move. This is something that you need to know, that now h5 is indeed the best response for black here to play further, to equalize this opening and to equal, so to not be worse in this position. Okay, we shall step back and we shall again step actually to move a number 6, and instead of other moves instead of moves already seen with the f g and h pawn, we will now see some other moves with the bishops, which white can play in this position. First one is bishop to c4. Some players like this move because it immediately challenges f7 square. Some of them will hope for some winning sacrifice on f7, but we will immediately stop any dreams with e6 move here. So after bishop c4, I recommend e6, and there is no f7 sacrifice anymore. And now what are other options for further options for white here? If now f4, we are allowed to play b5 and chasing the knight on c4. If more passive f3 is played, I recommend that we go also with more passive move with developing bishop to e7, preparing a short castle. If a3 is played, again we have time to play bishop e7. If a4, then maybe it's good to play. We are now not allowed to play b5, and now I recommend that we play knight to c6. So playing some counterplay on the queen side, and also immediately challenging the d4 knight. So after this pretty aggressive a4 move, I recommend playing like this, knight c6. Okay, let me step back. If bishop to e3, we are again allowed to play b5, chasing the knight, chasing the bishop, which will most probably go to b3. So, but it's time to play like this. And we step back. If instead bishop goes to g5, immediately pinning our knight on f6. So in this variation, many moves are playable, but actually I recommend here going immediately with h6. So if bishop takes the knight, we retake with the queen, and this is actually okay position for the black here. So I recommend this h6 move in this position. Okay, let me step back. If white plays short castle, we are again allowed to play b5, and I recommend to play like this. And finally, if white before chasing goes immediately with bishop to b3, b5 is also playable, but now I prefer to play knight b to d7 first. So knight b to d7, and then later we can see what will play b5 or something else. Knight can now jump to c5 also, attacking the bishop on b3. So there are now further possibilities here. Okay, we will step back to move number 6, and we will see actually very frequent bishop moves for white now. These are bishop to e2. After bishop to e2, Not a bad move, but pretty much passive so far. We again can play e5, and actually we will play e5 in most situations here. After e5, there are now only three squares for the knight. Knight d2 e2 is not longer playable. Again, knight f5 is not the best option because it allows d5 d4. So the better options for white are knight to f3 or knight to b3. In both cases, we will play bishop to e7, a developing move, preparing short castle. So after knight to f3 and also after knight to b3, we will play a bishop to e7. Okay, I step back. If instead black plays with another bishop to e3, which is even more common move. These are now really main lines. We will again play e5. Okay, we will play e5. Again, some players will maybe blunder because bishop e3 is in strong connection with f3 pawn in these Sicilian variations, and if some players pre-move this or something like that, play quickly, they will maybe forget on the attacked knight. So we simply take the free knight here. D takes e4. If instead knight d to e2, we again go with our main idea, bishop to e6. Okay. If knight f5, we are again allowed to play d5, d4. So this is again worse for white here. We step back and we see the best moves for white here, which are knight f3 and knight b3. After knight f3, I think that we have time for a more quiet move, bishop to e7 first. But after knight to b3, I recommend that we play bishop e6 first. And now there are again many options for white. We will cover some of them frequently played. If f4, we will take on f4. If knight to d5, we now don't need to take because white still don't have a strong development, so it is not necessary to take on d5. And actually, I recommend that we go with another developing move, knight b to d7 here first. Stepping back, if bishop to d3 now, we have already seen this move many times today, we have again time for bishop e7, preparing a short castle. Okay, stepping back. Also, if more passive bishop e2, I also recommend bishop to e7. Also, after another passive moves here like h3. I recommend bishop to e7. And let us see other better options for white. These are queen to d2 is now a stronger move, preparing immediately long castle. Now I recommend another developing move, knight b to d7 again. And also if f3, so this combination of f3 and bishop on e3 is really dangerous for further attacks, and actually I frequently in this constellation recommends h5 h5 moves. So here so after f3 I recommend h5 here. Okay, and we will see another one last option for white on the move number 6, which is also playable, and that is bishop to g5. I don't like this move as a white because of some variations that can occur, but now you can expect this as black, and we will now see how to play against this move, bishop to g5. Now, exceptionally, I do not recommend to play e5, but to play e6 instead. We will see what happens now in various variations here. So after e6, let us see what options white has. Actually, there are many of them. Let us cover briefly many of them. So if queen e2, we will simply play h6 immediately chasing that bishop, so to decide where to go. So h6. If instead b3, now bishop is not on e3 but on g5. This is another situation now. Now we don't play h5. Now we play bishop e7, unpinning the knight, preparing short castle. So I recommend to play like this. If after our e6, black takes the knight with the bishop, we will recapture with the queen, and actually we are in okay position for black. We step back to see other options. If queen f3, preparing further pressure on f6 knight, I recommend that we further protect that knight with knight b to d7. So after queen f3, we play knight b to d7. Okay, stepping back. If a more passive bishop at e2 is played, we have again time for bishop e7. Stepping back, if more active bishop c4, we also play more actively. We immediately chase the bishop again with h6 move. Stepping back, if bishop to d3, we again have time to play bishop e7, and the last two options frequently played by white are first queen d2, protecting the g5 knight, preparing a long castle. We will again immediately chase the bishop with h6. And finally, stepping back, the main line here after bishop g5 is f4. So the meaning of bishop g5 was actually this move. So players who know the theory will most probably play a f4 move. And now you need to know how to play, and actually the best option for black is queen to b6 targeting b2 pawn. And frequently we will really take, white will really allow us to take on b2, but this will not be the huge actually any advantage for black. This is so-called poisoned pawn variation. So this pawn is poisoned. The one pawn up here is not an advantage at all. White have enough counterplay. So this is a really interesting game. Maybe it's not in my style. So I will not play bishop to g5 as as a white, but I will play this queen b6 if I need to, if white plays this variant. So queen b6 is recommended. And now if white plays queen to f3, this is played by players who like to develop but do not a look on protection on their pieces, and simply this is a blunder. Queen will takes d4 and we are in a huge advantage. As already mentioned, this really happens in a certain not neglecting amount of games. So I'm mentioning these frequent blunders here. Okay, stepping back, if queen d3, we are allowed to take on b2. We will see soon in another more frequent variant what happens on if now white attacks our a queen with rook to b1. But let me first step back to see some other variations. If it seems that queen b6 was not the best move for the black, because now white can also take on f6, bishop takes f6, and after g takes we have a ruined pawn structure on the king side, but we didn't castle. We are actually in a good shape here. We can fight here, and actually maybe in some variations we will still go to the short castle. So this is maybe a computer-like play, and maybe it's not completely intuitive, but don't be afraid of this variant. Just simply try to play it, because really queen b6 is the only good queen b6 was the only best move for only a really good move for black here. And so if you need to play this variant after bishop takes f6, g takes f6, we will play it. So it's not unplayable for black at all. Actually, computers says that black is in a small advantage. Okay, I step back, and to see last few options for white, frequently played. If a3, we will play developing move knight b to d7 again, further protecting f6 pawn, f6 knight. And also if instead knight goes to b3, protecting actually b2 pawn this way. Now we are not allowed to take on b2, but now we can play again knight b to d7, and black is actually okay. Black has a solid development, and it's not behind in the development. Both white and black here are okay, and it's an interesting game in front of us. But we step back. The main line here is actually allowing to take on b2, so white plays queen to d2. This is the main line here, and actually black is allowed to take on b2, and this is so-called poisoned pawn variation. We are a pawn up, but not in an advantage. And now the best play by white is rook to b1. Rook is protected. Rook is protected by the knight. Knight also protects a2 pawn, and so we don't have actually much options. Only not losing move is queen to a3, and our queen is not the best placed here, and that's the reason why we don't have any advantage here, although we are a pawn up, and white's rook is actually on an open and on an open file, so this is a really okay position also for white. And finally, there is another option to play for white here instead of rook b1. There is maybe a slight worse option, but some players will play also this. This is knight b3, and again, but I again recommend that we simply put our queen on a3 immediately. And that's all for this Open Sicilian. In the next video, we will cover other options. So after e4, c5, if white plays the main line knight f3, this is called an Open Sicilian, and we will see other variants. The most common among that is play with another knight c3, and also some other variants leading to the so-called closed Sicilian. Okay, thank you for watching. See you soon. I hope that you enjoy and that you will learn how to play these openings, and that you will not be afraid to play no matter do you play against a good player or a lower rated player or even computer, that you can be simply with these openings simply confident at least in first 5 to 10 moves with decent tactical awareness, and so watching not to blunder early. Okay, bye bye.